We started to have it 15 years ago from scratch. It's been an interesting development to work out what was the best way of making a business out of it. So we started off more as a restaurant, and slowly but surely we developed into a cafe bar with live music 5 nights a week. Quicker and easier to pull a pint than it is to cook a meal. Simple. People are more adventurous now, especially young people who like to try different things. When I was growing up, you know, you had a choice of probably 3 or 4 beers in the one area, and that was it, and that was your choice. And spirits was maybe 4 different spirits, and that would be the lot. Nowadays, hundreds, thousands of different products all the time. So yeah, in the world of beer, there are literally hundreds upon hundreds of different beers. Craft beer can be very hit and miss. So a new beer will come onto the market initially, and it will seem to be fantastic, marvellous. The next cake, the next cask might be brilliant as well, but slowly down the line, a lot of them, the quality deteriorates. So I now carry a combination of craft beer and mass-produced beer. I think the younger generation are more particular about what they're drinking, whereas the older generation are stuck in tradition, if you like, and they will stick with what they've known. If a customer likes a particular beer, it does not matter how it is produced, that's the beer they're going to drink. And there again, you get other customers who want to try new beers all the time. Taste-wise, there is a definite trend at the moment leaning towards the heavier beers, the stouts and the porters, which traditionally would have been associated with winter months, but now it's becoming more and more popular all the time. I have phone calls from new microbreweries 7 days a week. I don't know how many there are in Yorkshire, but there must certainly be thousands now throughout the country, so yeah, a massive swing towards craft beer. Microbreweries, obviously, when they initially set up, are working to a budget, which means things like sterilisation of the empty kegs and equipment is difficult, and that is where you get a variation in the quality of the product. Whereas, of course, the mass producers, everything is mechanised and you never get a variation. It's always the same product. So hence we carry a mixture of both types. It is a trend, but I think it will be here to stay. I think a lot of the microbreweries will survive for a short period of time, and then they will either get swallowed up by the larger breweries or they'll go out of business.
Set the brewery up 7.5 years ago. Prior to that, I was a research scientist at the University of York and at Imperial College London. But about that time, a whole range of things with funding meant that I decided to leave science, and with my wife Jane, we decided to open a brewery. And the name of the brewery comes from the sound of a drum roll, so Treboom. It was kind of like that kind of ta-da moment. Here we are. We were very lucky to be introduced to Martin, who is the site owner of where we are, and he very kindly agreed to build us a brewery. So he had an old barn here and he wanted to do something with it, so he knocked the barn down and built this. So we were able to design the space exactly the way we wanted. And at the same time, we got some EU funding to help set up, so we were able to buy brand new vessels and containers, because stainless steel is very expensive. So we were able to get funding to be able to help us set up as well from the Rural Development Fund. Jane and I have been talking about wanting to do something together for a long time. It always came down to sort of quite a simplistic idea of making something that people would enjoy, and I like my food and my drink. And I looked at a number of possibilities. I even thought about making cheese, but I've been a home brewer since I was 16, so it seemed an obvious choice at the time. When we started, there were 700 breweries in Britain, but now there's nearly 2,000. So there's been a huge boom in microbreweries since. There's a massive debate at the moment on sort of online forums about people who are into brewing. For me, craft just means is that we handcraft these things, that it's small batch. It's kind of almost not quite an industrial process. It's not like the big lager boys who have huge vats of the stuff. We make it on an individual basis, I get, and it's very, very hands-on. Yeah. Well, obviously we compete to try and sell beer. We're all chasing that same guest pump in the pubs. But in fact, we get on very well. Yeah, people who like beer generally like each other. So yeah. This is where our main brew house, where we do all the brewing, as it were. Basically a cold water tank and a hot water tank. We have our own water supply, which is very, very important for the overall flavour of our beer. And then we have a mash tun, which is where Tim's sitting here at the moment. This is where the malt is put in, and this is where the magic happens, where we convert the starch, which is in the malt, into sugar. It takes about an hour and a quarter, that does. What we end up with then is a very sugary, sticky solution called wort, which is what we will be fermenting later on. That's the sugar that will be used for the fermentation. When it's finished in there, it gets pumped into the copper, where we bring it to the boil. We add our hops. There are two main types of hop that go in, a bittering hop and an aroma hop. And what we're extracting from the bittering hops are the sort of acids which exist in the hops, and that gives the beer its characteristic. And then the aroma hops go in virtually at the end of the boil, and we're extracting essential oils of the hops which give the beer its aroma and final flavour. And then once we've boiled it for a while, which does lots of things, it helps extract those things and also sterilises the solution. We pump it through into the fermenter. So we've got 3 fermenters. And then at this point we add the yeast, which does its magic of turning what is quite a foul liquid, it's sort of bitter and sweet at the same time, but turns it from that into delicious beer, and at the same time produces a little bit of alcohol and some other few things as well. The yeast is really important for the final flavour of the beer, because it also produces things like esters which give fruity notes to the beer. So that takes about, it depends on the beer, but maybe 3-4 days to ferment, and then we cool it down, and that helps some of the yeast drop out, which makes the beer nice and clear later on. And then we pump it next door into our chiller room, essentially it's our cellar, and put it into storage tanks in there, ready to be racked out into casks or go off for bottling. So the whole process from brew day to the final product is about 10 days, 2 weeks, something like that. Typically, we will brew Yorkshire Sparkle, our best-selling beer, virtually every other brew, and then we brew some other ones. We've got some other core beers, a best bitter, a strong pale ale, and then we make a special every month as well. So a full brew should be around 40 casks. It's usually a little bit less than that. We call this our malt loft. This is where we store all our dry ingredients. We've got things like malt. That's what we use to get the sugar that we need for fermentation. It's based on barley, but there are other malts. You can see we use wheat malt as well. And we use about 1/4 ton of that per brew. The majority of the malt that goes into any brew will be what's called white malt. So it will be pale ale malt or wheat malt or lager malt. There are a whole range of them. But then at the same time, we will add some coloured malts. So things like dark crystal or roasted barley, and those give colour and flavour to the beer. And then at the same time, this is where all our hops are. We've got hops here from all over the world. Things like Pioneer and Target are British hops. We've got hops from Poland, the Czech Republic, France, Germany, Slovenia, and also from New Zealand, Australia, and America. So stuff from all over the world. And they all have different flavours. Hops can have sort of a huge range of different flavours. So using the balance of the hops along with the malt is what gives the sort of massive variety of beers that you can make. You know, people who like beer generally like each other, so yeah.